Hello there and welcome in 2025. While I was searching for game releases in our new year, I stumbled upon this title scheduled to release on 17th of January. Since I have completely no experience from the previous games released in this franchise, the title Origins has persuaded me to give this Asian product a try. Therefore, you shall be graced with the perspective of the player who just delved into the franchise and can present opinion of a newcomer. Welcome to Dynasty Warriors Origins Credible Review. This game has so many ups and downs that I'm not really sure where to begin. Luckily for me, I still run with the idea of dividing the review into separate categories. I'd like to add a few words before we start to get a better understanding of what we're dealing with here. Dynasty Warriors is a series of games which started in 1997. I do not want to antagonize the die-hard fans of the franchise, but for me as a person who had not played any of the releases in their childhood period, well, let's just say I had a really hard time convincing myself to this game. So before you say, hey dumbass, that's how this mechanic is supposed to work, bear in mind that most of the newcomers won't share your enthusiasm. Now, let's start with the easiest one on the list, graphics/performance. For the whole span of my playthrough, I felt like I was playing a game released on PlayStation 3. Sure, the cinematics were quite admirable, the character models during conversations were somewhat okay, but the amount of repetitiveness I felt during my adventure made me think they just reused their assets into every possible map. Is it lack of budget or simply laziness? I cannot really tell. I felt like I was playing the same map with a tiny modification here and there. There might have been two maps that really stood out in the last few missions of the game, but there have literally been cases of returning to the same location once or twice. In my country we have a saying for this and it translates roughly to microwaved schnitzel. As for the performance goes, I haven't encountered a single crash. I got 3 freezes but was able to continue the fight. The framerate was extremely stable, so in that regard I give a thumbs up. The animations were alright, adequate for the game's genre. I've got no particular opinion in this matter. I personally enjoy the staff, so that's what I went with for majority of the game. Moving on to the next thing stimulating our senses is the sound/voices.
So, they've cut us off. We may be outnumbered, but we must not falter.
We must rise!
That voice.
Although the soundtrack also felt repetitive, I cannot deny the fact that the music really suits your brain, varying from quick-paced energetic drum and guitar music encouraging you to rampage recklessly on the battlefield, to the slow, melancholic violin melody accompanying you during conversations. And the conversations had quite a decent voice acting that highlighted the emotions in the vast majority of the characters.
Tonight, I wish to etch the features of your face and the sound of your voice into my memory.
That one battle cry when you start a charge with your army gave me an absolute joy. The remaining sound effects such as swoosh of the staff, the metal hitting metal, make a tasty sprinkle to ready good ice cream. The only downside is the limited soundtrack as mentioned before. Now let's make a quick transition to the story. It's definitely one of the strongest points in the game, if not the strongest. I would not stray far from the truth if I told you that half of the game you spend on talking to the characters, and there's a lot of characters. In fact, at certain point I thought there were too many. It even was hard to keep up with the names. As a result of that, we received lots of characters that you may grow fond of, but the small amount of screen time for said characters may leave you in a disappointment. Yu Ying, Dio-chan, you will be missed. I personally think it's better to present less characters but have more backstory than to show dozens upon dozens of names that you will forget in a matter of hours. I understand it's a big legacy, but again, as a newcomer it's hard to keep track of things, especially with the foreign names. I managed to remember the fat guy named
Magnum Dong.
The story offers many political intrigues, interesting turns of events, plot twists, war room council, the memories of your past and many more. Although you possess some dialogue options on your character, they basically change nothing in the final outcome. It's an illusion of choice. On top of that, your main protagonist does not have a full voiceover. Not only your character suffers from Alzheimer, but also got his tongue cut off apparently. I wouldn't mind getting rid of the illusionary dialogue choices and just give our Ziluan the full voiceover. It's 2025, at this point we got some expectations, come on. It's not like we already have 15 hours of voice dialogues in a 30-hour game, which kind of made me think I was playing an Asian visual novel game. Without spoiling too much, the most impactful choice starts in about halfway in a storyline where you are presented with the choice of the factions. Depending on the faction you choose, there are finally differences as how the story plays out in the end. I went with the Green Boys as they possess the purest of hearts out of all the remaining options. It's also the characters I met at the very start of the game. It was an easy choice for me. Now we finally get to the most interesting category by far, and man do I have a lot to talk about. Gameplay and mechanic wise, this game provided me with lots of annoyances and letdowns. Even such simple thing as controls have driven me crazy. I had to remap the controls and I cannot count how many times have I accidentally jumped on a horse mid-fight when I least wanted it to happen. Nearly 2 hours into the game and I realized I had to turn autoplay for dialogues just so I could relieve myself of the burden of pushing a button after each sentence. Another thing that was a bit frustrating is the fact that none of your, quote, kills matter. At certain point in the game you keep fighting the same officers over and over again. Even when you strike a killing blow and the body lays on the ground, the game tells you that the character escaped multiple times. What in the flying illogical fuck? This counts for both the officers and the main story characters. It's another microwave schnitzel just like the maps. What happens on the battlefield is not coherent with the story whatsoever. The biggest letdown for me combat-wise was the sharp blades acting like a baseball bat. You don't receive a cutting feedback or even a slightest drop of blood by using swords, blades, etc. All the characters have this weird force field around them that essentially works as if the troops were a bunch of training dummies. Forget about impaling someone with the tip of your sword or spear or even with a finisher move. This does not exist in the game. For immersion purposes, I had to run with the staff because the blades don't matter anyway. The game feels like it's made specifically for Asian public and a very young one, I might add. The talent tree or the skills tree is also a big disappointment. You get a few perks increasing your inventory space, meat bonds capacity, attack, defense, thresholds and stuff like that. It's completely uninspiring and it exists just to fill in the blank spot, I'm afraid. The weapons of the same type can differ depending on their attack damage and passive abilities, so there is that. The gem creation is yet another thing to get rid of your currency that you pick on the miniature world map. This map can give you sort of a hero's vibe now that I think about it. You get to traverse it with your horse from one point to another, gathering collectibles along the way. This game does not offer free exploration of Chinese landscape, so to speak. I mentioned weapon types and it is indeed something that brings some amount of fresh air into already repetitive gameplay. You've got 9 weapon types to choose from that can be fully unlocked as you progress in the game. On top of that, the weapons also offer battle arts that use the resource you build up with evading, parrying or simply attacking your enemies. You also get an ultimate that allows you to quickly get rid of hundreds of enemies in one sweep. For a limited time, the game also allows you to play other characters and use their abilities and weapon types. Their ultimate is also really powerful, so make sure to aim it in the dense, crowded moments to get that big 1000 on your screen. Before we skip to the summary, I'd also want to mention a few things regarding the battlefield. There are interesting mechanics that allow you to duel your opponent. During that period, the soldiers gather around you and cheer for their contestants. I thought of it as a very cool honorable addition in such warfare. If your officers are low on health, you can come to their aid and increase their health simply by running towards them. If you fail miserably on your map, you can choose a checkpoint from which you want to start over. Just be careful about your resources. When you respawn, you do it with the exact amount of health and meat bonds. That inevitably forced me to reset the whole boss fight once or twice. Not to mention the last battle where I lost probably an hour due to the lack of checkpoint. The summary. I have very mixed feelings about the game. In the end, I'm not really sure if I liked it or not. There were so many ecstatic moments like killing 1,000 soldiers in one strike and so many disappointments at the same time that I really had a hard time picking up a score for this game. But considering the fact that I enjoyed the recent Indiana Jones game more than this, I'd have to give Dynasty Warriors Origins a 6.5 score. Again, this is an opinion of a newcomer who hasn't played any of the previous games, but the story and dialogues are on a really good level, I do admit that. On top of that, the game cost me about $70-ish, which is far too much for a game of this low budget, with that many flaws. The game offers you some decent level of entertainment for about 30-ish hours, and if you are not a big fan of the series, I'd recommend waiting for the price drops, which will happen eventually. Bear in mind that 6.5 is still a decent score. Unlike IGN, I rate the games very harshly compared to the magnificent gems such as Witcher 3 released in 2025 or recent Baldur's Gate 3, which were one of the few games I'd rate 10 out of 10. The next game I'll be covering next is Sniper Elite Resistance, and then soon after Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, so stay tuned for more in February. I bid you a very good day and farewell for now.
Tonight, I'm going to take all of your measurements. I'll be as accurate and as thorough as possible.